Okay. Good morning, everyone. I think our roundtable is an excellent follow-up after this really enlightening talk by Jenny, reflecting on what science communicators are, the professional culture of being a science communicator. When I think about science communicators, I think about them as bridge builders, matchmakers, catalysts, the people who really build those understandings. But I really like this idea of also being obviously facilitating dialogue and ensuring reflection, much more than just explaining. So, to get started, the first thing we're going to do today is I challenge each one of my panel members to introduce themselves in 50 words, no more than 50 words, and to say something in the introduction about their professional lives, but also something to, about them as people. So I'm going to start by introducing myself. And if I have to think about the words that are close to me, it would be family, oceans, biodiversity, and young people or students. And in my work as a science communication researcher at Stellenbosch University in South Africa, I'm privileged that I'm able to combine these passions of mine very often. And I specifically enjoy research in science communication, looking at the role of the scientists, especially those scientists that become very visible in society, but also then of course, the science communicators that work closely alongside them. I worked for many years as a practitioner myself before going back to research. So, over to you, Michel.
Hello. It was? Yes? Okay. Hello, hello. Wait, it's better. I can feel myself. In Chinese, Daja Hao. Okay, that's it. I have a PhD in science, and I used to be a science communicator in different areas, including the media, public and international organizations. I've been a spokesperson at the European Commission and head of communication at ITER. ITER project is the flagship project on nuclear fusion, including China. And my personal hobbies include cooking, including Chinese cooking, because my wife is Chinese. Badminton, and I enjoy writing since the age of 12, and I published 17 books.
Luisa.
Good morning, everyone. I am Luisa Massarani, and I started working in science communication in '87 as a science journalist. And then now I work in practical activities in science communication, research in science communication, and training in different levels. Short course to scientists, to journalists, to press officers, but also master and doctorate degrees. And in terms of personal stuff, I love traveling, so I'm really glad to be here. Thank you.
Hi, it's my honor to be here. My name is Yang Liu. Being a science communicator, a PhD in biology, and a passion for communication allows me to bridge the gap between the science community and the general public. And I'm also the co-founder of Guoke, one of the most well-known for-profit organization in China that's dedicated to science communication to the general public. Thanks.
Fabien?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here with us. So I have degrees in physics. Good morning, everyone. I'm Fabien Medvecky, and I have backgrounds in philosophy and economics, and that shapes my approach to science communication, especially my interest in the way that values and ethics interact with the way that we research and practice science communication. And when I'm not nerding out on science or its communication, I like to eat some more, eat a bit more, and drink some wine.
Thanks. Please. Hi, I'm Michel Morelos from Mexico. I'm a journalist at heart with a passion for water. I have specialized in environmental issues for over 10 years, working as a teacher, a journalist, and institutional communicator across public and private sectors. I love exploring second-hand markets and discovering hidden treasures.
Fantastic. So you can see we have a wonderful panel combining researchers, trainers, educators, practitioners, philosopher even. So we really, I look forward to this discussion. So we have prepared a few responses, and I hope there's going to be time. So if you have questions at the end, we'd also love to hear from the audience. So we know that being a science communication practitioner has its challenges. It's not always an easy space to work in. So I want to start by asking Michel, what do you think are the challenges faced by individual science communicators in different career settings? Some are in institutions, and some are in the commercial sector, etc.
Yes, we are all dedicated to science communication here. This is our common point. Another common point is that we may have some difficulties in our jobs to do this, and it can be as in other jobs, of course, because your manager disagrees with the way you drafted a press release also. But it can also be pressures coming from the top management or even the outside world. In my career at ITER, for example, I had a strong disagreement with the management about the communication strategy, because the new management engaged in a sort of marketing campaign about nuclear fusion, which led the managers to publish wrong, false information on the website, but also in speeches, press release, etc. So I strongly disagreed with this. For example, on the homepage of the ITER project, the title was Unlimited Energy. On Earth, nothing can be unlimited, and we don't even know if we will produce ever fusion energy. So I say this is completely wrong. And they say also, for example, that ITER will produce 10 times more energy than injected in the system, which is wrong. It's 10 times more the energy used to heat the plasma. But if you take all the consumption of the plant, ITER, the net consumption will be negative. So ITER will consume more energy than it will produce. Okay, well, you can explain this. This will be an experimental facility. So people, even the lay person, can understand this. So you don't need to lie. So I had a big clash. Unsurprisingly, my contract was terminated. But then colleagues came to me and told me confidentially about misconduct in their own departments, or falsification, illegal decisions. There had been 2 suicides also, etc., etc. So I collected all this information. Of course, as a former journalist, I double-checked the information that I received. And then I started writing something, and then what to do? I could close my folders because I'm no longer involved, but this would be against my own values, personal values, my own ethics. And because I want to be loyal to my former employer, I think maybe I should do something. So I decided to become a whistleblower and to go public after having consulted my wife, because you take a risk in doing this. You take a big risk for yourself. And my wife said, do it for our children and for the young people here. Okay, so I did it. So it has some impacts, of course, in the media. I was invited at a public conference in the Parliament, the European Parliament in Brussels, to report publicly. And this has a big impact, of course, in the media and also on the ITER organization, because they decide to change the 2 top managers. I'm not sure I played a role in that. Maybe I triggered a little bit or accelerated the process. But and after that, because I know that they considered going to court about me, about my case. And after that, I was almost relieved, and now I have very good relationship, and my reputation is now correct. Voilà.
So a very compelling story to start us off with. Certainly difficult for science communicators when they face those sort of power differentials, also with, you know, and having to point out when things are simply not acceptable or even unethical. I want to go to you, Yang, on the same question. Challenges faced by science communicators that you have experienced in different settings.
Okay, thanks. I will be talking from an organization's point of view, because I'm running this organization. So first I have to define whom I'm working with. So the science communicators that we're working with are editors and writers. They have different challenges. So usually editor is willing to consider science communication as a full-time job. So what's their problem? They're going to wonder where this career path will lead. If they ever change a job, will the new position match their previous experience? How they improve themselves in terms of a better editor? And to be a writer, there will be another issue, because usually writers are freelancers. Sometimes they exchange manuscripts or video content for money. So the problem is, how can we get them motivated all the time, for a long time, to produce very good content? So those are the few challenges that are not in common. But there is something also in common. You know, everybody knows that we live in an era where information come out every day from all different sorts of channels. And for example, if I'm a reader, I can read articles in the morning, I can watch videos and watch live stream. And now information will also be delivered through VR and ER, those all kinds of new things. So there will be new challenges for science communicators every day on a daily basis, because to communicate science itself is already very difficult. You have to understand the science precisely. But now you have to learn the new trends. You have to catch people's attention, and you actually are competing with more fascinating stuff like short videos, things like that. So those are the challenges that they face.
Thank you so much. That's really a fantastic reflection. So, Michel, at the floor end, I want to ask you the same question then.
The same. For me, one of the biggest struggles is the precarious working conditions, especially for journalists. In Mexico, for example, many newsrooms expect us to write 6 articles a day, a weekly investigate feature, and a social media post for less than $100 a month. The demand for immediacy can be overwhelming, and it's hard to maintain the quality of our work. In fact, is that why I step away from full-time journalists. I still collaborate independently with some publications, which I absolutely love, because I can dive into the stories that I'm passionate about, but I need to quit. And actually I'm in an NGO. It gives me some more stability and opens me incredible opportunities to tell stories about environmental conservations, which is really rewarding. Also, I think that is something else that I want to touch, and is mental health. Reporting on environmental can be emotionally draining. It's tough, and I think that we need to do a better job of supporting each other to this. And a more personal note, I recently found that I'm in this trouble also, that I'm pregnant. Whoa, yeah. And honestly, I'm scared. So my job often takes me to remote places. And now I have figured out how to slow down and balance my work life with this really new reality. So I'm still learning. I think that a lot of women in here are still in the same process, but there are many amazing stories to tell, and I need to remember that we are part of these stories too.
So I think on the topic of support, it really helps. All the stories we've heard so far, we know it helps just to know that somebody else has experienced something that you may have experienced, to hear how they handled it, to hear, to get advice. And that's also one of the reasons why we have this roundtable today, for all of us as science communicators to be able to support each other. So on that note, I want to ask then first Luisa and then Fabien to talk a little bit about support structures and how regional and national associations and networks can make a difference. Maybe let's start with Fabien and then Luisa.
Thank you very much. Look, I think it's interesting. There's real differences in what you can do with associations depending on the scale of the association. So I've been both involved with PCST, which is a global network, but also with the local association when I was president of the Science Communicators Association of New Zealand. And what you can do at different association level is quite different. At a local level, you have much more capacity to run something much more proactive in a way because you've got this geographical and cultural proximity amongst each other. And I think that's an incredibly useful resource. And so one of the things we did used to run regularly, for example, was networking events. We had regular forums where people could get together. I mean, being together here in a room is incredibly valuable, but it's much more difficult to do when you're in a global network. And particularly for people who are working, say, as a part-time journalist or whatever else you have, you don't have the resources necessary to go, but you do at the local level. But at global level, of course, this is not so easy to do. We can do things online and so forth. But I think the things that's really, really valuable about the networks is, as you said, to have people that you know who share some of your experiences and so forth, people who've been there before, people who have got the capacity to point to things. When we talk about people who may have knowledge of other resources that are really helpful. And I can say that certainly at PCST, this is a discussion we are having at the moment, is increasingly how do we support science communicators when there are difficult moments, when there are moments of challenges. And I think, as I was saying, my background is in philosophy and ethics, and I always think there's a view in ethics, a classic view in ethics that ought implies can. If you say somebody should do something, you've got to make sure they've got to be able to do it. You can't expect somebody to do something that they can't do. Now there's a question about what it means to be able to do science communication. We say people ought to communicate. Well, what does it mean to be able to communicate? And part of what it takes to be able to do something is to do something safely. And so there's a question, I think, that we have as a moral imperative, if we ask people to communicate science, to make sure they can do it in a way that is safe, that is comfortable, that is supported, and so forth. And I think actually that's a real moment of reflection for science communication associations who promote science communication. And how do we create that? And I think we do have the capacity to offer some of that support. But I think that's also a really important step of reflection for us to think about how do we do this.
I think that's incredibly valuable. Thank you, Fabien. Luisa.
Yeah, so here we had comments about situations of crisis or mental health situation in the everyday life, and also the issue of safety, which is a big concern nowadays. But also even from the everyday life of some young or even not that young people working science communication, at least in my reality in Brazil, we started, and in Latin America as a whole, it's a very lonely path, right? We want to do that, but we are doing by ourselves. We don't know exactly how to do or how to get training. So I think that in that sense, without the situation of crisis, it's very important to have this opportunity for networking, which I think that's the best thing of thinking together, new projects, etc. And associations or networks can go beyond that. And I would like to mention a very beautiful case, which was created 20 years before PCST network, which is the Ibero-American Association for Science Journalists, meaning Latin American plus Spain and Portugal. And it was created in a very beautiful movement because a lot of people isolated working by themselves in different countries in Latin America, in Spain. And so they start doing things together, meetings, and start joining together efforts, and then they created this association, which allowed to create national associations, and that was really the first moment in Latin America in which we start creating this thing called science journalists, with national associations and a professionalization of science journalists. So I think that's a very unique example.
I think we all experience it when we come to PCST meetings, whether they are large conferences or smaller meetings. You feel at home, you feel like you're with your tribe in a way. And when you go home, you often feel, that feeling of isolation because there may not be that many people in your country or in your organization who understand what it's all about and who share the same passions. And I certainly in my career experienced that as well, where, when I was at a PCST meeting, I was so energized and really enthused by everything I learned and heard. And then I go back to South Africa and it's a bit of an uphill struggle to get people to buy into some of these ideas. But what I maybe want to add from my own experience is to encourage young people who are joining the PCST network to reach out, to make yourself heard, to ask for help. Use the PCST discussion list. Because the network has been incredibly valuable in my career for support, but also sometimes on a slightly more personal level. And if you'll forgive me, I really want to maybe just use 1 minute to acknowledge how specifically Tos and Jenny has helped me in my career. When I wanted to leave my paid job and start a business, Jenny made it so easy for me, really encouraging me, giving me resources, and with encouragement for Tos as well. And more recently, I was up for a big interview, and Tos offered to do a mock interview with me, to be the difficult boss who would grill you in an interview, and he did it really well. And that kind of support is what really makes a big difference. So it's the formal networks, the formal collaborations, the formal agreements that I've had with many people on the stage here and also in the audience, but also sometimes even on a personal level, a job level, a career level, if you need help, it's really valuable. Because we also know that we've talked a lot about professionalization of science communication as a profession to get recognized, to advance your career. And that's, I think, these networks that you talk about can make a big difference. Now, the next topic I want to briefly reflect on is this breaching of theory and practice. That is something that is close to the network. We want to make sure that research can be relevant to the real world, and we also want to make sure that practitioners can also inform research. So I want to ask, let's start with you, Yang, to say something about that. How can we advance that?
I think the first question I have to answer is, I should explain why I'm qualified to answer this question, because I'm not from any research institute or institution, I'm from an organization, for an organization like ours, we have to really find the resources that to survive and to do what it is that we want to do. And for us, science communicators are the most important resource. So we are always worried that how can we get enough writers to write with us. So one thing that we started 3 years ago is we collaborated with the Science and Technology, the University of Science and Technology of China, the communication department. We established this program, this graduate level program, to help the graduate students to gain some practical experience before they go out to find a job. So what we found, there are already 3 years, and I collaborated with like a dozen of graduate students. And one thing that I found is what they learn at school cannot equip them for a position later on in an organization. Because the first thing is that they learn recent trends from their textbook or something like that. But we learn trends on a daily basis, or at least we review the trends every week, right? So what they learn is sometimes old-fashioned. And they learn how to make a great video, how to write an article, a report at school. But when they post something online, they started to realize that it's another story. They really have to put the most interesting thing up front, because you're afraid that you will lose people's attention. That's the first thing. So what I want to say is that I hope we can really do something to help the students as well as their teachers to stay tuned, to keep up with the latest trend in the real world.
Thank you. Luisa?
I would like to answer this question thinking more globally. So teaching is a part of the science communication field that's really younger. Most of the programs actually were created in the last decades, for example. So in the context of the PCST network, we created the PCST Teaching Forum, which involves people who have been teaching different levels in the world. So one of the things that we did, and with Marina, with Michel, and many other colleagues, was to create a map of teaching in PCST around the globe. So it's a very dynamic panorama, it changed a lot. Many new programs are created every year. Unfortunately, others just die. But so what we saw is that there are at least 120 programs around the globe, and from 31 different countries. It's more about US and Europe, but Latin American is a very interesting region because we do have many different programs. But we see that many of them are for research focused or practical things. So it's very difficult, probably maybe known, I don't know, but there are very few that really think about the bridge, think together, research and practical activities, which I think that's the big good thing in science communication, to have this holistic view of science communication.
Michel, now that you've listened to, we heard your story and you listened to some of our colleagues about how we can support science communicators, and what would you say maybe as a closing thought about helping them to cope with challenges, also harassment, some ethical issues? What would be your advice going forward?
Thank you. I think, from my point of view, science organizations still need to recognize science communicators as a profession, and they should accelerate the professionalization of science communication. I've seen in many organizations people with no experience whatsoever in this field appointed head of communication. Okay, we know good science communicator with no scientific background. We all know this. Good journalists also. But appointing someone with no experience in communication whatsoever, head of communication, for me it's still a surprise. So there's still progress to be made by the scientific organizations themselves. They should also, in my view, enforce professional integrity, not just scientific integrity, professional integrity for all the staff. And voilà, this is my 2 points of view.
I think associations have a really interesting and important roles to play on this. I think the idea of professionalization of science communication for me is actually a really tricky situation, because I would be very cautious about going towards the way of accreditation and those kind of things. I think part of the richness of Science Communication Association is the breadth of who we welcome and what we take to be part of the scientific science communication community. And so while I think I consider there is absolutely something really important for recognizing professionalization, and there is an important thing to do, whether that's the role of a Science Communication Association, I'm not sure that that's really our role, actually. I view our role as being welcoming, generous, inviting, creating relationships more than anything else, and creating support. But I think the professionalization is actually a slightly different discourse for me to what the association does, in a way. For me, I think we are there to provide the support and the necessary resources for people to have a rich, thriving life, whatever that life is. And they may just be dipping into science communication for something, and I think associations should be that as well. So I think, well, the professionalization is an important aspect of working as a science communicator. I think that is not the key role of an association in science communication. I think we are there to support those who are down that path, but I think we are much broader than that. But we do have the capacity to provide support where it's needed. So support for feeling safe, supported when you have challenges at work, support for finding works and being supported in creating networks for work. We are there to support it. But I think there's a very, very delicate balance of how we do that.
Yeah, I think that I agree. Also for me, the Mexican Network of Science Journalists was key. I'm here for the support of the Mexican journalists. And it was one of the founding members as a student. And today we are a group of 170 journalists and communicators across Mexico and Latin America. We run various projects from forums, for discussions, or workshops, seminars, and training for our members. So I think that beyond the professional support, I gained incredible friends who have been this for me through some of these toughest time of my life. So I think that it's so important, these kind of organizations. And also, as I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest challenges we face is the lack of funding for the features. I don't know if it happened in the countries, but in Mexico we need a professional figure, like a legal figure. So the Mexican science journalists, these organizations, can provide for me so I can apply for fundings. So this is a huge change deal, and I get a fund for World Wildlife Fund, and I run, I'm a little bit nervous. I lead a project over 60 people that I collaborate in initiatives through journalists and scientists alike. Journalists were selected through an open call, and scientists were giving media training. So we took the journalists out into the field, so they could witness firsthand the water quality monitoring work being done and the collaborations between researchers and local communities. And also for this project, we publish 8 feature articles, and we try to ensure the independence of the grading process. That I think that it's incredibly important. And the scientists didn't get to see the final pieces until after we're published, because I know that we need to maintain the journalistic integrity. So that's also a question that we need to.
Fantastic. We have about 10 minutes left, and I want to use this opportunity to ask anyone in the audience, either if you have a question, maybe you have a great idea about how science communicators can better support one another, maybe you have a quick experience to share about this topic of support for professional cultures. Anybody?
Can I just add something?
Sure.
I agree with Fabien that I think professionalization is the responsibility of an organization, because you want people to work with you. So what we did is we designed this career path for them. So first is their editor, and it's the mid-level editor, senior editor, and editor-in-chief. I think that's our responsibility. That's one thing, to get them motivated, to help them to set a goal. And I also want to comment a little bit on the previous talk given by this, I don't know how to pronounce your name, sorry, Jenny. I think at some point for a journalist, they will start to think that how can my work to influence the society, to do some real work instead of just giving information. So I think that's really great feedback for a science journalist. So in China, there's something similar happens, that the science journalists think of a way to solve real problem. You know, in China there are a lot of reserve, and you have to. What we did is we, not our organization, but what they did is they divided a sector for tourism. Then those people in this region will know that if they help, they will gain more money. So they will be motivated to really protect the reserve. And then the people who is doing this communication, it's really, he has so much positive feedback, you know, because he really did something to change the world, to change what people think. So I think my point is that how to help them. One thing is to set a goal for them. The other thing is to really give them positive feedback all the time.
Right, fantastic. No, that's really valuable. Anybody from the audience? Yes, please, Sujata.
Thank you very much. So just a comment, since it hasn't come up in the discussion so far. I think PCST is a member of the International Science Council, which does, of course, no? Oh, okay. Well, okay. Because I was going to say that there is a whole, they have responsibilities at an institutional level to support freedoms and responsibilities of sciences, which they understand that very broadly. But of course, there's also the UNESCO 2017 recommendation on science or scientists and scientific researchers, which again is understood really broadly to include science communication. So that is another, and it's something that all member states have signed up for. So yeah, that's another vehicle, if you like, for gaining support.
Anybody else? Yes, Martin, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very nice to how Marina is opening up challenges. Can I maybe put another challenge to the panel? Reminding ourselves of the research Marta Entradas has been kind of stimulating for the last few years, which is a possible issue that science communication might have with the wider world of communication. If we're talking about professionalization, communication is heavily professionalized. In the UK, they use the term professional is slightly cute. They talk about the communications industry. And what is meant here is the public relations world. So do you see any tension with the public relations world, which is the professional angle of communication and science communication? Are we merging? Is that the same thing? Is this just nothing to worry about? What do you think about this?
Well, yes, I think we all have strong views about science communication versus PR, but let me start with Luisa.
Yeah, Jenny was saying I disagree. I agree with Jenny disagreeing with you. I think that one thing is one thing, another thing is another thing. And also there are other areas in science communication, and this is more clear in Portuguese or in Spanish, because we word a different word that's not communication. Because there are other areas beyond communication and press officer or in our field, right? Like museology, anthropology, and all the etc. related to that. So I don't think that, I think that's more about diversity. Obviously there are individuals, there are tensions, but I don't see as a field there are tensions between communication and the yeah, so that's my view.
I think I disagree with you, who agrees with Jenny, and therefore disagree with Martin, if I have this right. To the extent that I think communication, I agree that communication, at least in some sectors, is quite professionalized and quite structured, and I think we can't dismiss it, which is why I'm really cautious, and I can just say I was involved with an aside with another association, national association, talking about a kind of accreditation for science communication, and I find that move very problematic because it goes towards that very professionalization, and that's what I was resisting before. I think we need to be very, very careful about what that does, because it limits who can come in. And I don't think associations should be gatekeepers necessarily. At least I don't see PCST as a gatekeeping association. So I think there is a real tension here, something that's delicate to play. I don't think that that's I think that the very professional associations have because they are gatekeepers in some ways, I don't think they necessarily are playing in the same space that PCST does. Because that's exactly what we don't do at the moment. What we do is create support through network, through relationship building, through in some way much more subtle ways and much more personal ways. And actually I think that's exactly the value of PCST. And also, being global changes the character of things. Most very professional associations are often much more set within jurisdictions. So I think this is exactly the strength of something like PCST. National associations might be different, and that the national characters of the various associations are different. I can tell you in New Zealand, I went to some PR conferences because PR was read broadly, and science communication was read broadly, so there was an overlap in the Venn diagram. So I think that also just depends on the context. I think the strength of PCST is coming from its global character. We're not looking at that kind of space.
I think maybe that's a fantastic conclusion to this roundtable, is to be reflexive, as Jenny reminded us this morning, to understand that science communication is not the same thing as science PR. I think that's an interesting debate. It can be a whole roundtable on its own. But to also keep in mind that our job is to be those, to have understanding, but to have reflection, to have dialogue, to sometimes be critical of science, to embrace different ways of knowing, to include different knowledge systems. These are the things that are values for me of what science communication is about. And there's overlap with institutional communication. There's definitely overlap with some aspects, I guess, of professional, PR, but it's definitely not the same thing. And I think also that's why we, as science communicators, have strong resonance with the world of science journalism, because science journalists ask critical questions, they reflect, they serve the public good. They don't serve institutions or science necessarily. They are there to be critical and reflexive. And I think it all comes back to your story right at the beginning, Michel, that sometimes we face problems because we don't want to always just celebrate and praise science. And we have to stand up when science is promoted in a way that's not ethical or not acceptable. That's also one of the challenges that we will face if we want to be reflexive and critical and ethical science communicators. So I want to say just before somebody misunderstands me, of course public relations should also be ethical. I mean, and that's why there can be overlap. But I will just maybe wrap up now. Our time has run out, unfortunately. Thank my wonderful panel. I think this topic is so important. It's close to all of us, whether we're researchers or practitioners or in the world in between or journalists. The way the world is evolving, many of us are not in a single box anymore. We wear different hats, we play different roles, and that's also why these networks are so incredibly important to support our careers and our development and give us opportunities, and sometimes just give us somebody to talk to and to help us when we face difficult times. So thank you, all of you, for being willing to participate, and thank you to the organizers for giving us this opportunity.